This is one of the most intensively logged areas ever. One thing about Vancouver Island that people don't know, 80% of the primeval forest is gone. 81 out of 93 watersheds on the island has been eroded and gutted by industrial logging. Primeval forest is virtually gone. Of the 12% that's protected, 6% is above the tree line, rock and ice. So 6% of Vancouver Island's magnificent forested legacy has been utterly destroyed. But what people don't realize is that the second growth is gone as well. They started in logging the 150 years old second growth down around South Island, moved their way up there, and now they've cut their way down the timber profile until the logs you see going down the island highway today are 30-year-old stands of timber. Trees that I planted myself are being logged right now. That's why Medill has gone under. That's why there's no logging jobs in Nanaimo anymore. And it just goes on and on. So being fired for refusing to handle the fertilizers was it launched my environmental activism. Now this conference, and I'm just about finished. How's my time doing? Am I over?
Don't worry about it.
Well, this conference, a year ago, June Ross got a hold of me and invited me to speak here, and I thought, that's a great privilege. I'm thrilled. And 10 years ago, we actually had another conference in the same room on the same subject. But a couple of weeks later, she wrote me an email and said, Ingmar, there's been some complaints. People say you're not acceptable to speak about the Nanaimo watershed, and that they think you should be pulled off it. Well, thanks to the organizers, they had confidence and they supported me and kept me on the agenda. Well, then part of the agenda was to have a tour of the Nanaimo drinking watershed. And suddenly the logging corporation sent a letter and said, no, we won't allow any tour on our private land. So the organizers said, well, that's ridiculous. What's going on here? This is our drinking water supply that supplies 80,000 people in Nanaimo. We should have access to it. So they went to mayor and council and said, look, you know, the logging company's saying we can't go up there. What's going on here? And it went back and forth, and the logging company said, okay, well, we'll have the tour, but we have to provide the guides. And we'll be conducting the tour, and the buses will stop where we say it stops, and nobody else will be allowed to speak. And by the way, Ingmar Lee is not allowed in the watershed. The organizers went back and said, no, that's not acceptable. We're conducting the tour. You know, if you want to submit your corporate justification for clear-cutting our watershed, that's fine, you know, go ahead, but we're going to conduct the tour. And it went back and forth, and finally said, okay, well, we'll let you have your tour. But there's several hundred people coming. 2 days before our conference, our tour started yesterday, the logging company, Island Timberlands, based in Bermuda, they don't pay taxes to the Canadian system. They got back and said, oh, by the way, you're going to need 300 hard hats, 300 pairs of cork boots, or however many hundred people you're bringing up here, and high-vis vests, and you'll have to sign a waiver that nobody has diarrhea or anything like that, and you'll need $10,000 worth of liability. So that's why we were disallowed from entering our watershed yesterday. And this speaks to the problem here. The problem is that the Nanaimo community drinking watershed has been stolen. It's owned by the people who've lived here for 10,000 years. It's not owned by Island Timberlands. And what I fear about this conference, I keep hearing people talking about, we've got to reacquire our watershed, we've got to buy it back. And I've heard talk about $165 million. Bullshit. That's, you know, bullshit. Like, expropriation is too polite of a word for these criminals against the environment. Expropriation is too polite. I say confiscate. We can take that land back. We owe nothing to that logging company. Take it back and start to heal it from the top down. Thank you. Just the rate of destruction is very voracious. And you can see on the right-hand side of this photograph, there's still some trees left on the Gemini Ridge. But those, you can be assured, those are all gone. Timber West has gone in there and cleaned those all up. Now, just in the middle of the picture, some of you might recognize the Green Mountain ski hill and the roads going up there. That is the last stand of the Vancouver Island marmot, the last bastion, the last holdout of Canada's most endangered species. Now, the Marmot Recovery Project, which has been going on for some 20-odd years or whatever, has been trying to find out what's going on, why are these marmots going extinct? You know, there's a problem, but we're not really sure of it. I'm not, you know, and people were very interested. Some funding was accrued. About 60% of the funding for the Marmot Recovery Program come from Timber West and the logging company. So, you know, one of the problems that we have in BC is that when you want to argue about environment and talk about it, they want to know what your scientific credentials are. And, you know, I'm no scientist. I just have gone around and seen the effects of logging on the ground and crawled through it for 21 years. And what I've found is there's what I call the fanaticism of scientism. There's a almost religious fanaticism that says that everything that we need to understand the world has to be framed in science, and that's got all the answers, and that's where we have to understand the world is from a scientific perspective. Of course, there's a stack of papers that would reach the ceiling of this room here that demonstrate, scientifically prove that the worst thing you can do to protect drinking water is to log the watershed. But unfortunately in British Columbia, the science is for sale that proves that black is white. And that's what a logging company does. Whenever there's a complaint about logging in the drinking watershed, they can trot out some guy who'll come up here and tell you that it's all good. So I have to always have that skepticism that you have to be scientifically literate, you have to have a PhD in science to be able to, you know, a PhD in chemistry to prove that putting dioxin-laced fertilizers in the watershed is perfectly acceptable and shouldn't affect the health. But anyway, these scientists at the Marmot Recovery Program just couldn't figure out why the marmots were going extinct. And, you know, it is relevant because Green Mountain is within the 230 square kilometer Nanaimo community drinking watershed. So, I say that the Vancouver Island marmot is now extinct. It is now extinct. That's contrary to what you would hear from the Environment Minister, Barry Penner, who every year lauds the fact that, well, there's now 250 marmots around, whereas when this picture was taken, there was 30 marmots left, possibly 20 marmots right at the top of Green Mountain. The problem with Barry Penner and his 250 marmots is that these are laboratory-bred marmots. They're bred in the breeding laboratories, and every year there's a photo op for Barry Penner and various dignitaries to go up to Green Mountain and spread out a few of these laboratory-bred marmots out onto the former colony sites, which are right up there at the top of Green Mountain. And then they sit back and hope that when the snows come in the fall, that these marmots are going to crawl into their little burrows and reproduce. Well, that's not happening. The only reason we've got marmots today is because we've got Weyerhaeuser or Island Timberlands and Timber West and the BC taxpayer funding these breeding laboratories, which are up by Mount Washington, and that there's an annual sort of spreading out of fresh marmots out over the landscape with this hope and the prayer that somehow they're going to take and start reproducing. But the problem for the Vancouver Island marmot, in my opinion, in my non-scientific opinion, is the perpetual logging vision for the watershed.